chat just like you would have down the pub. We talk about politics, trade unionism, how that impacts on our lives. And we chuck in some other stuff as well as we go along. And it pretty much, I mean, we were saying before, just chatting before the program there about meandering. We like meandering on this on this program. So tonight I think my big struggle is going to be able to finish this within some sort of reasonable time, actually, because I think we've got people who really love to talk in the most, and I mean that in the most positive way. Okay, so tonight we're taking Pint Politics on tour, and I am virtually flying into Liverpool now, so Liverpool is the first place that we're coming to, and I'm just admitting Tracy Hilton into the meeting so we can introduce her as well. Tonight we're really privileged actually to have 4 great activists from Liverpool, and the idea is with these kind of going on tour programs, which we'll be doing now and again with Pint and Politics, is just to go and chat to activists within cities, towns, regions, maybe even some villages, who knows. So tonight I've got firstly I've got Alan Gibbons, super activist everywhere. He's secretary of Liverpool Walton CLP, and also not a former life, because you're still doing it, aren't you? But you're a renowned children's author. My son actually loved your books. I've read so many of them. Okay, but we won't mention Alan's football allegiance tonight, I don't think. I think it's probably politic not to, Anyway, Alan, what are you drinking tonight? What's your tipple?
Tea.
Tea.
I'm teetotal. I don't
drink
alcohol.
We had a few weeks ago. We had a Tony Benn in tribute to Tony Benn. We had a teetotal one. So it's good to see you, and thanks very much for coming on, Alan. Then we've got Alice Bennett, who's a former councillor, chair of Garston and Halewood CLP. That's right. Also a Unite activist, and is it fair to say you're a big Jeremy Corbyn fan, Alice?
Yes. I nearly wore my Corbyn t-shirt, and I thought that would be a bit much, but yeah, I'm a Corbynite to the end.
It's it's really good to have you on. And what are you drinking?
Earl Grey. I'm also teetotal. I'm really sorry. Liverpool is a nightclub city, but we also love our tea. So
yeah, it's just lockdown, isn't it? I mean, but Earl Grey's though, that's classy tea.
Very, only the best.
I like Earl Grey. Thanks very much for coming on, Alice. Anyway, next we've got Tracy. Just managed to get in time. I know you've been having laptop problems, but you're in. Tracy is a member of Liverpool Riverside CLP. She's also on Momentum's National Committee and stood on the Forward Momentum ticket for that. And she's sort of a general rabble rouser, would that be fair to say? I mean, I've seen quite a lot of photographs of you online, and in every one you're giving it some. You okay, Tracy?
Yeah, I'm fine. Sorry for the tech delays. I've had to switch tools 3 times, and I'm drinking coffee because this is my 3rd meeting of today.
Yeah, I know you've all been busy today, haven't you? I mean, I haven't had as many as that, but that's it's hard work, like, isn't it? And Tracy, by the way, you're not originally from Liverpool, are you? From the northeast?
My accent's from the northeast. My mum and dad were in the forces. My dad's a Scouser. My mum's from the northeast, from Hetton. Moved to the northeast when I was 10, so that's where the accent comes from. Moved to Liverpool when I was 30, which is a lot longer than people might think.
Thanks very much for coming on. And then lastly, we've got Michael Hardy, who's also a member of Liverpool Walton CLP, where he's a youth coordinator. Is that right? Is that the right title?
Yeah, well, youth officer, yeah. Youth coordinator is fine, but youth officer.
You've also been star of Labour Conference, haven't you?
Regional conference. I'm hoping to stand to go to national conference if and when it happens this year, though.
Yeah, and you're a big Liverpool fan, and you live in Anfield. That's right, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. Spot on.
Good stuff. Oh, by the way, before we start, please, can everybody see what an effort I've made tonight? Probably is the wrong way around. Anyway, I'll read it out. So it's a Bill Shankly quote, and one of my favourite T-shirts, actually. Sorry, Tracy. No. So it says, the socialism I believe in is everyone working for each other, everyone having a share of the rewards. That's the way I see football and the way I see life. And I think I don't know if Shankly really knew quite how powerful that was going to be when he said it, but I mean, it's incredible, statement about socialism and about what we believe in. And I think what's really nice about it is the fact that it's kind of it could also be a description of the way that we organize our socialist movement as well. So everybody doing the hard graft and everybody getting some of the rewards. And I just think it's such a great sort of statement of grassroots politics as well. So anyway, so that's my little kind of token Liverpool Scouse kind of memorabilia today.
Perfect, Ben.
Thank you. By the way, I also mustn't forget Everton tonight, because I know, we're quite often I forget about mentioning Everton are done the with the Fans for Food Bank and things like that. They've done an awful lot of good work. So I will try and mention Everton now and again tonight. I did live with an Evertonian at a university, actually, and he seemed to dislike Everton more than any other club. But I think, to be honest, people would say that to me about Newcastle now. So, anyway.
You got one over them the other day.
The what?
You got one over on them the other day.
I know. They're our favourite club. Alan, before we start, because we've got a few sort of areas to discuss. We want to talk a little bit about the history of Liverpool's radicalism and so on. But before we start, just one thing that I need to clear up. So when we talked about doing this meeting, you talked about woolly-backs and scousers, and you said that there would be, you need to explain it, because I think I know what you mean, but can you just tell us what the difference is between a woolly-back and a scouser?
Yeah, I mean, woolly-back's nothing to do with sheep. I mean, I'm a woolly-back. I was born in Warrington. It's only 15 miles away from Liverpool, but it's like a cultural divide that is just a chasm. And I grew up in Warrington and Crewe. And in the old days, the people who brought in the wool, bales of wool on the back of the Liverpool docks, were outsiders to Liverpool. So they got called woolly-backs, but everybody thinks there's this nefarious interpretation of it. And I mean, I grew up even though the family were originally from Wexford in Ireland, Roman Catholics, I was sent to chapel, and I was brought up with this God-fearing chapel stuff. And nearly everybody I knew is one kid. The parents weren't that keen on sex, so just one kid will do. And then I came to Liverpool, and it's bloody chaos. Do you know what I mean? The first time I arrived in Liverpool, and I was in the Broadway pub in Norris Green, and this fella comes in with a massive sack of crocodiles, these Lacoste crocodiles, going, come on, lads, customise your Marxist jumpers. And I thought, I'm in frigging heaven. It's like a narco-syndicalist gulch. The difference in 15 miles is unbelievable,
Very nice.
By the way, Alan, my grandma had 15 children, so what can I say? Some top stuff.
Football team and all the reserve bench, brilliant.
I should say actually that I've got a stout tonight from Moore Brewery in Bristol, and I was born in Bristol, so it's very nice stout. Michael, were you joining me in a drink or?
No, I'm going to finish off being boring. I don't really drink very much either, so I've just got a pint of water. So we're not as boring as our drink suggests.
No, this is actually a really good sign for the future of the movement, by the way. All these,
Sober.
Yeah, Amazing. Okay, so anyway, Alan, I wanted to go to you first. Obviously, Liverpool's known as a city with a strong kind of radical past and socialist political tradition. I mean, how far does that go back? I mean, I know that there was quite a lot of liberals on the council, wasn't there, in the 70s and so on. But obviously, there's that kind of like strong radical tradition. How far back does that go?
I always describe Liverpool as the best of cities, the worst of cities. For example, it was a city intimately related to slavery. I was shocked when I came by the level of racism in some parts of Liverpool. It felt like an apartheid city. The first time I was living in Rusholme in Manchester, and to move from there, and I'd been here weeks before I realised there was a black community, and that really shocked me. The other thing, for much of its history, it was a real Tory town. It was aggressively Tory. Till the 1960s, the Tories were still strong. People don't realise this. Labour was late in the game, 1955, before they dominated the council. And so Liverpool, through the 18th, 19th century, had a very reactionary position, but at the same time, ideas like syndicalism grew. For example, there was a seafarers' strike in the 18th century where they actually marched to Liverpool Town Hall armed, and then you get these great moments, like, for example, the 1911 General Transport strike. 80,000 people on St George's Hall. 2 workers were shot dead. Churchill had to moor a gunboat on the Mersey, and people like Tom Mann were involved. But even then, James Larkin, when he asked for solidarity in 1913 in the Dublin lockout, condemned the Liverpool Trades Council for not giving enough solidarity. So you got these 2 souls going on, and then I think you come to the greater. I think Thatcher seals the deal of this being a radical city. Bessie Braddock and Jack Braddock, ex-communists who moved to the right, kind of created that Labour tradition, really instilled that Labour tradition. Eric Heffer turned Walton red, and it never really turned back. But in the 1980s, you get this absolute fissure where the threat of abandoning the city, the 47 Labour councillors, the huge solidarity that was shown to the miners in Liverpool, and then compounded by things like the dock strike, which was an immense, titanic struggle. Liverpool Toryism virtually vanished as a creature. There's not one Tory MP, there's not one Tory councillor in the city, and I don't think there ever will be again. Over our dead body will the Tories crawl out of the sewers and come back into our city. And I'm very, even though I'm an outsider, I've only been here 40 odd years, I love that radical tradition, but much of it is quite insurgent. That kind of stable engineers and craftism was much weaker in Liverpool. So you had the explosive Tory right, incredibly racist and reactionary, and that syndicalist insurgent left. And I think that really sums up the city. The waterfront's got a lot to do with that. I mean, casualisation on the docks, people had to fight with their fists to get a job. All of this creates the stuff that you see culturally in things like Boys from the Black stuff. And when you talk about Evertonians, I'd recommend people go and see The Golden Vision, a Ken Loach movie in 1969, superb. And The Big Flame about the Liverpool docks, where they imagine a Soviet on the docks, a workers' council. So yeah, I love Liverpool for The Big Flame. That's what it is, The Big Flame.
Thanks, Alan. I mean, that is such an interesting, very quick kind of rundown of the history, because I think it feels like it's different, very different from other parts of the working class north. So northeast has a different kind of tradition from that, and I think you're right about that kind of insurgent feel. Tracy, I just wanted to ask you, what are the kind of who are the key figures in that history? People who would be the sort of 1 or 2 people that you would pick out and say, look, they're really important. You need to know about them from Liverpool's kind of radical tradition.
Oh, well, there's far too many. And whoever I mention, you know, I'm going to feel like wrong because I didn't mention other people and feel like I'm snubbing people, and there just isn't the time. I think a lot of the ones that Alan and other people have mentioned are well known. So I will specifically concentrate a little bit on the radicalism of the Black community, which I've been lucky enough to work with people from that and benefit from their experience. But, you know, I bow down to them for what they've done in the struggle. The Black community in Liverpool has always been radical and has come out fighting. They've had the Liverpool Defence Committee. We had Black Panthers in Liverpool. This is well before my time. They were involved with the ANC. There was people from the ANC actually came over and lived in the Liverpool area, and there was a lot of working with people on that. They even went out to Somalia when there was the big, you know, when there was a big famine, and actually went out and physically helped to support people there. And they've done a lot in actually bringing in communities, every new wave of communities in the area. But I would say so many people to name, so, some of who have gone, some of who are still very much alive and showing them. Alan Gale, who is the brother of Howard Gale, the footballer. Howard himself, obviously, you know, like refused an MBE. He does a lot grassroots in the community and around fighting racism in football and sport now. He's a great ambassador for that. Maria O'Reilly, who was, you know, one of the great people there in the LA Defence Committee. Patrina Lashley, who was actually, you know, like a very central figure and wrongly vilified and should have been the first Black mayor of Liverpool. Linda Lau. Lots of people who went for political representation. A lot of people, like, their influence went just beyond, not just beyond local and nationally, international as well. Many of them were kind of picked to influence in London, and people like Lee Jasper will certainly tip and nod to the help and experience and the influence of Black activists in Liverpool. Like I said, there's far too many. There's an excellent book out right now written by Dave Clay. It's on Amazon. I'll try and send you the link. Lawrence Westgaff, a local historian, has written a lot of stuff as well. You know, so there's great stuff there. So all we can do is recommend a reading list, and there's stuff out there on the films. A lot of people are very active now. You can see them in early films around the uprising of 1981. You can see Buster Nugent, who did the I Am OK recent thing around George Floyd, Anna Rothery, who's now the first Black Lord Mayor of Liverpool when they were young, and they're still active now. And what we're really all in focusing is, you know, like trying to get people, and young people are actually coming up with different ways to react to things like George Floyd now, through Instagram and setting up their own stuff. So it's a very interesting time, but very much influenced by just one last thing that the LA Defence Committee did when One Shot was causing issues. They actually arranged for all of them to go in and buy items in pennies only to cause mass inconvenience. And they did many great things, and all I can say is bow down to them.
Yeah, brilliant, Tracy. Thank you very much. Alice, is there anybody that you would add to that?
I think obviously I'm chair of Garston and Halewood, and I would add Jack Jones to that list because he was an amazing General Secretary of Transport and General Workers Union. I've actually thought I would be really useful and show people his autobiography. He was just really influential politically. He fought fascism in the Spanish Civil War. He was a leading light in the trade union movement, democratizing industrialization and the motor and transport sectors. I think, you know, I mean, we've got United named Jack Jones House. I don't know how, he's a Liverpool icon. I don't know how that goes beyond Liverpool. But also Alan mentioned very briefly the 47. We still have people of that era, of the militant era, who are active locally, and I would, you know, like Tracy said, I would bow down to them and what they did for the city. And I've also got Tony Mulhern, his autobiography. He sadly died the year before last, but that's well worth a read on the militant history. It's called The Making of a Liverpool Militant. It's just a brilliant read. And, you know, he's not around anymore, but his legacy lives on.
I love it when people bring books, by the way, because I run a bookshop in Durham, and it's great. Everybody should show us a book. Michael, is there anybody that you know, like, obviously you're a bit younger and you won't remember some of the things that we're talking about, but is there anybody that kind of stands out in the history that you would like to mention?
Well, I would like to echo some of Alan's sentiments. Obviously, the people have been said by the other people on the call are brilliant activists and being brilliant, powerful people in the movement. But Eric Heffer would be somebody who'd stand out for me. Basically, taking Liverpool Walton from what was a pretty safe Tory seat to now on a trajectory to being the safest political seat in the country, with 85.7% in 2017 and 84.7% in 2019. I think that's some way to get a seat in about 50, 60 years. So I would probably say Eric Heffer, and it links in as well to the stuff that you're saying about the militants and the 47 and whatnot, when Eric Heffer very famously stormed off stage at Labour Party conference that protested the then leader's comments made around the situation. So I think Eric Heffer would be one of the names that are up there for me.
Yeah, and Heffer wasn't from Liverpool originally, was he? He was from Hertfordshire, yeah. But he was, you know, like, you can't get somebody more, like a politician that's more identified with a city, and that's amazing, really, isn't it? That he managed to be so accepted and identified. Alan, is there people that you? I mean, you've mentioned Heffer already, and is there other people that you would just want to kind of highlight as well?
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, James Larkin, who was born in Liverpool 8, and there's a march every year with an Irish flute band for Larkin. And he was the big man. You know, you go down O'Connell Street. I mean, I think for any of us in the Northwest, not just Liverpool, Manchester's very much the same as an Irish city. You know, you feel at home in O'Connell Street, and you walk down and there's the big man with his arms out, leader of the 1913 Dublin strike, leader of the communist movement, you know, in Ireland through the 30s, big man in trade unionism in America when he went over there. An amazing figure. And then there's reformers like Eleanor Rathbone, you know. And I think the other thing we should always mention is the musicians, and that all of these musicians, people will point out mistakes they made. But I mean, the real thing and the chants, you know, the chants were adopted by McCartney as the first black band. They should have made it as big as the Searchers. They never did, because of the colour of the skin, because of the apartheid that existed in the music industry and in Liverpool. We've got to be straight about this. But the real thing evolved. And I mean, they produced an LP that was as radical as anything on this planet. It was absolutely fantastic, you know. And I think people like Alexei Sayle, you know, were absolutely groundbreaking. The humour he gets. I used to argue about Ireland and communism and Stalinism with his mum Molly in the Shakespeare pub in Liverpool. Never met Alexei at the time, but when he skits his mum and dad, you know, for loving the sort of tractors ploughing up the virgin ground and taking him on holiday to an East German factory. I could hear Molly speaking, do you know what I mean? The man is a genius at capturing the voice. I think the oral tradition in Liverpool. Scousers can talk, you know, and they reel off story. I think a lot of that is the Irish tradition, and absolutely superb. And the other figures I'd say is people like the Irish Volunteers of 1916, who went over to join the Rising in Dublin. And I'm proud. I mean, my family's from County Wexford. It's the only town outside Dublin that rose in 1916, you know, and that's bloody superb. And you can go. the volunteers are commemorated in a church on Scotland Road, and it's just glorious to go in there and see the plaque and everything, you know.
Yeah, incredible. Alice, I just wanted to pick up on something you mentioned before there about the city council in the 80s and as kind of Alan mentioned as well, the fight that they took up against the Thatcher government. How kind of, because I mean, one thing sort of question I suppose would be from the outside. There's this kind of idea that militant are kind of like an embarrassment and a shameful kind of. But from what you've said already, and from what I hear from people who come from Liverpool, they still have a lot of respect, and that isn't necessarily on the basis of agreeing with everything that they ever did or said, and as Alan said, about the musicians, they make mistakes, but they're still. Am I right in thinking that they're still popular and also I suppose that although in a sense that kind of militant moment was a defeat on one level, but it's also seen as a kind of way of kind of developing a kind of radicalism in Liverpool. Is it? Would you say that's right about when you think back to the 80s? I know you were only young, weren't you?
Very obviously. I think. The thing about militant was it kind of did really spring up as a result of Thatcherism and that Liverpool model of economics, which really tried to bring the city down in a way through bringing down benefits, clamping down on working classism, if you like, and we'll talk about the riots as well, which was really pertinent to that whole model. And I think what militant did was really brave. Was so brave that it was seen as stupid because they were seen as risking the city. They wanted to set an illegal budget. The government were clamping down on them. Our own party, Neil Kinnock's speech at conference was actually really good, unfortunately, and it kind of did, for a lot of people, it did embarrass militant. They looked as if what they were doing was just too risky and stupid, but actually what they really did was set in trail, I think, in Liverpool, and we'll come to Jeremy Corbyn because we will, but I think it sowed a real socialist seed in Liverpool. The 47 weren't really shunned as people think they were. They were smeared. We all know about smear campaigns, but they carried on. You've got the Merseyside pensioners. They are so radical and so brilliant at campaigning, and they are the original, or some of them are the original 47, and that's such a brilliant movement. And that sprung up, since Corbynism, since 2015. It's not militant, it's socialism, and they've taught us how to campaign and how to stand up for the Tories, and that's my take on it. And when I've attended the pensioners' meetings or their events, it's unbelievable. It's just so inspiring, the thought that they had and what they were prepared to give up to save the city. And I'll tell you what, the city pretty much supported them, but the party didn't.
What about you mentioned
down there?
We just mentioned the riots as well. Can you tell us a bit more about the Toxteth riots? Because I think that's interesting and maybe not as well known, maybe nationally, as sort of Brixton riots. About the same sort of time, weren't they?
Yeah, well, it was the summer of '81. I remember because I said earlier my family's from Toxteth. From Upper Parliament Street, and that was the heart of it was the riot triangle, if you like. There was Princes Avenue, Kingsley, and Upper Parliament Street, and it was there were riots in Brixton, and it was similar: working class oppression, police, institutional, racist, physical aggression, and it was a perfect storm. Unemployment was really high. We had this Liverpool model by one of Thatcher's economists that was just creating a real kind of vacuum of jobs, of opportunities, and the people who suffer most because of all forms of racism are usually black males in those instances. So we have like Alan said, he didn't know there was a black community, but it seemed like they were in the ghetto of around the Granby Street area, and there was a lot of police aggression. And the famous incident that's cited to have caused the Liverpool riots was Leroy Cooper being chased by the police, accused of stealing a motorbike. He was knocked off it and arrested, and lots of people were unemployed and happened to be outside hanging around the streets. They had nothing to do. The police were going for this black guy, and all hell broke loose, and it lasted about 4 days and went on, intensely. Fires, someone stole a milk float, and I remember my grandma's gatepost being knocked over, and this milk float was just going haywire. But people were they were desperate and angry, and they were so oppressed as well.
Tracy, did you want to kind of add something to that then?
Yeah, just quickly, it was an uprising, not a riot. And it happened in St. Paul's in Bristol as well. And it's sad that here we are, that there's a meeting with our first black MP this week with the head of police about the high incidence of stop and search in this city still. So there's still a lot around that. And there was, some stuff came from that, improvements, but a lot of it's short term and taken away, and the black community is still fighting through and through. Just a quick thing about Militant. My experience of Militant, I was in the Northeast at the time and in the Labour Party Young Socialists. But for black people in Militant in Liverpool, there was a different issue. There was an issue around Sam Bond, where a black Londoner was brought in to lead on black things. And there was things that went wrong there that, didn't necessarily create a good relationship with the black community, which also must be looked upon. But the legacies of council building and fighting, definitely. And also, I forgot to mention about organisations before, about the brilliant Liverpool Black Sisters, but there is so many, Amadou and Mary Seacole House, to name but some.
Well, thanks, Tracy. Before we move on, because I want to talk about Corbyn and kind of move on to more contemporary stuff, but is there anybody, Alan or Michael, who want to say anything more about that kind of period?
Do you know what? There's one thing I'd like to. I mean, Tony Mulhern. During the Mulhern period, because I wasn't in Mulhern, we had lots of arguments at that time. The man never held a grudge. When we had this dispute, which helped to consolidate the Liverpool left, which was keep the guard on the train, the RMT were out for months and months and months. We had an anniversary, a year's anniversary on the picket line. And when there were lots and lots of good socialists turned out for that. Some people didn't. But you know what? Tony Mulhern, when he was not a well man, really knocking on, he would turn out in the bitter cold in his black suit, his black coat and his black cap. I've got nothing but respect for that man. Do you know what I mean? Because when I used to talk to him, it was the history it had, seafaring and the print, and then all the stuff with the 47 and the risk to your house. And it was absolutely fabulous. Do you know what I mean? He never veered from standing up for working class people. That's what you really know. And that's what I admire about people. I don't want to hear people reeling off screeds about political ideas divorced from the reality. If the ideas, the great ideas of our movement, don't translate through to better housing, the fight against equality, materially driving fascists out of our city, if that isn't part of the offer, forget it. Don't blather. Get out and do something.
Cheers, Alan. So, Michael, when getting more to your kind of era, sorry, I'm not gonna mention your youth again, but but yeah, so Liverpool very much took to Corbyn, as a human being, but also the whole movement. So there was, there was so much being built in Liverpool around the Corbyn Project, and we saw those huge, enormous rallies in Liverpool, didn't we? So what was it about Corbyn and that project that kind of appealed to Liverpool?
Well, I think first and foremost is that what we've all referred to already is that socialist strand that runs through the core and the vast majority of people in Liverpool, and the ethos and the kind of charisma that that brings with it for an individual as well as the city. But that had been for decades we'd been without a Labour Party that had them values in its entirety at its heart, and the leadership hasn't always seen eye to eye with the lots of socialists within the city and within the party, even though the vote share would always be overwhelmingly for Labour in recent decades. But when Corbyn came around, that kind of narrative was broken, and we kind of had somebody who was representative of that core of the city that we'd had, and that the core values that we've stood for. The fact that we've been so harshly done by, we've arguably the city that was been worse off over the last few decades based on Tory rule from the 80s and over the last 10 years as well. So when there was the final opportunity that we could have some real change, somebody who could spearhead that campaign, who was also a genuine man, who could break the absolute nonsense rhetoric that politicians are all the same, which is the thing that we got. We knew that the system was rigged. We knew the system was against us. People who were young people as well know that from who were told the stories about what happened during the 80s. Like even when I was in school, there was insults even then which was quite recently, about people who were being milk snatchers, referring to Thatcher and taking the milk from the children. And so that kind of ethos was still there, and Corbyn epitomised everything that we believed in and everything that we had those values for. So people come out and support. And the thing that Corbyn did was that he reached people that never spoke about politics. Politics wasn't for them. It managed to get itself into schools. Kids in school were talking about what this man was standing for, what this man was bringing. It was getting into workplaces. It was actually where politics was usually the taboo subject that wasn't allowed to be spoken about because it was boring, and it was all the same. It broke through those barriers, and that's what it was. It got to the real heart of our city, and it did, and it brought people together. The rallies on St George's Plateau, some of them were absolutely amazing, and every time he come, he'll be greeted by thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people, whether he came more recently when he was in Bootle, or whether he came and he was in the city centre. There would always be a massive turnout because of those politics, because we know that the system is rigged and it's not tinkering around the edges. It's not moving slightly left to centre that's going to bring about real change, that's going to fundamentally change people's lives. It's about whole system change, and he offered that, and people recognised that, and that's what people were inspired by, and that's why constituencies in Liverpool saw their vote shares at the highest levels ever under Corbyn's leadership. They didn't just increase by small amounts, but they increased even between 2015 and 2017 by over 10% in some constituencies. So it just shows the strength of feeling that was around what was already a Labour city that was becoming supportive of the socialist Labour that we were seeing.
And Alan, just when Michael's describing that, you feel the excitement, can't you? And I remember seeing, particularly on social media, something like footage and these enormous panoramic photos of St George Square and all that, and it I suppose, is there a kind of sense of loss now? It's been a tough time, obviously, for socialists in the party and outside as well, with all the limitations of COVID and lockdown. And are you seeing like a sense of recovery or green shoots on Merseyside in terms of kind of socialist activity, or is it different from other parts of the country? Because I think certainly in the Northeast we felt like a real dip, and we're just starting to come out of it now. But how's it felt in Liverpool?
Yeah, I mean, just to backtrack, as well as the numbers that were there at St George's Hall, it was the people who you thought had gone away or you hadn't seen for a bit. It was like you were throwing your arms around people that night, When it poured down, we got 10,000. For example, the Blacklist support group were there, guys who had been bloody victimised out the jobs. People like Audrey White, who led the Lady at Lord John dispute against sexism and sexual harassment. Loads of friends that you hadn't seen for a few years suddenly were popping up through the crowd, and it gave a boost to everything. Every demonstration, like Corbyn came to Everton Park gymnastics centre, and at the back they've got football pitches, and City of Liverpool Football Club, a non-league team, organised the integration of asylum seekers, and Jeremy visited those guys. The first place he went was, Calais, the refugee camp. There was a moral conscience and authority. Now, since the fall of Corbynism, and we can talk if you want about the problems, but since the fall, I think it is taking a long time to get together. I mean, I think it's definitely true the trade unions are recovering. The CLPs are taking a hit. I think Riverside lost 300 members, since Starmer come in, and our CLP is down about 200 from the very height of Corbynism. And it's not the activists who tend to be going; it's people who are Corbynite but not in intimate touch with the party. And I think that's reflected across the city. The things that give you hope is the recruitment and the appearance of good trade union organisation in the National Education Union. I think it's a disgrace that on the national call, one of the general secretaries, Mary Bowsett, thanked the Lib Dems and the Greens for supporting the case, but they didn't thank Labour because Labour was obsessed by opening up the schools, even when infection rates were high. The DHL strike is fighting against harassment and victimisation of staff. And the British Gas strikers have been inspirational. We've gone down every time they've turned out, and they have these kind of flash mob events all across the city. And it's fantastic. And that's where I see the hope. I think any Labour activist who just obsesses about the battles with the right wing inside the Labour Party are missing something. You've got to have one foot in and one foot out. You've got to be in the campaigns. I mean, refugees during the pandemic, there's been some great events around the refugees. And again, when I talk about Audrey White and the woman organising the refugees, Nina, the refugee events and everything, they're suspended like me. And I think that is going to be the other focus. If we can win reinstatement for these people, I think that can be part of kind of putting your foot on the ground as you're dragged by the bus, and you get that traction. You say, right, we're fighting back now. We've rolled back far enough. The Labour Party is not the Labour Party without socialists in it. And we're not going to accept this idea that you can expunge a tradition. You can't. It will pop up again. Every time you push us down, we reappear. We don't go away.
And
well said, Alan.
yeah, well said. And Tracy, just Alan's talking about 1 foot in, 1 foot out. As I said, in your introduction, I see you out there campaigning all the time. What are the sort of things that are the kind of big issues in Liverpool at the moment? I've obviously been really impressed with the fan supporting food banks campaigning. And then has been mentioned a couple of times already about the protests of British supporting British gas workers. Are there quite a few things emerging in Liverpool, and what are the things that the main the activists are campaigning around?
Well, what I would say is, since people kind of really started to get together in 2015 in Liverpool, there has been a working together from Labour Party groups and trade unions and campaign left groups. I think there needs to be an understanding that the left is not just Labour. The left is a broad movement, but Labour is obviously the way to get parliamentary power and hopefully sooner than later a government. As Alan's already mentioned about the RMT pickets, most of us were down there week in, week out, showing solidarity from Labour Party and from other trade unions, my unions, PCS. And we turned up. We've turned up in support for many things, camel lads, various things, but also very strongly anti-racism. Both Alan and I are involved in an organisation, Merseyside Together, which was formed to fight the rise of the far right in football fandom. And a couple of years ago, we leafleted all the Merseyside football grounds. There's been other stuff done, like murals and stuff, which I'm sure Alan will go into. There's been long-standing campaigns, such as Hillsborough. The city has never given up for justice on Hillsborough. And the city has joined in campaigns that that aren't from their city. We've got Liverpool supporting Grenfell turn up on the 14th of every month to show solidarity for what's going on there. We've had events around the Windrush generation about support for them, for the Stansted 15, lots of stuff around the climate emergency, which is crucial to everything. Lots of anti-racism, green, climate emergency issues, trade union solidarity, and also wider things around cuts to services, and the very real things that impact people, as you pointed out, which is around the right to food, all the poverty that's coming up, about 0-hour contracts, and there's been a lot of activity, and obviously we've had to change the way we do that in some ways because of social distancing, etc. It's on Zoom. We're able, people are turning up and showing physical support, petitions, whatever it takes, raising money for practical stuff on the ground. And I'm sure Alan and Alice and Michael will say this as well. People actually just getting on with the practical support during this pandemic about making sure that people can access the services that they need, the support that's out there, the mutual aid, the food banks, the food credit unions, whatever it is they need. It's about practical socialism in it's many layered. Socialism isn't just, signing your membership for a party or a trade union. And what we can do depends on our own individual circumstances. But, there are many ways to be involved, and many people are involved in many ways. And even people who are dropping out of the Labour Party continue to be involved in those other activities in the broader left, but for whatever reason have either been suspended or chucked out of the Labour Party or left of their own accord because they're not happy with the way things are. But everything else that's going on the left, they're still on board with, they're still turning up for the pickets, they're still helping with the COVID support, they're still signing the petitions and turning up at the meetings.
Brilliant.
Can I mention one essential thing that we've barely mentioned, and that's Hillsborough. Yeah. One thing that as a strand, like a ghost, was that terrible day. But then the response, I can't think of a city where you would have seen that decades-long battle for justice. And I was at the ground when Andy Burnham, basically laid the basis for the inquiry at the end of the whole thing. And this guy behind us just shouts, "Justice for the 96." There must have been 20, 30,000 people there on a Tuesday morning, and it just echoed out, and the resonance of "You'll Never Walk Alone." And Celtic and Everton both showed solidarity during this. I mean, it was a thing that I said, a kind of a cultural experience, and I think that is part as well of why Toryism can never take root again. Bernard Ingham, Thatcher. And I'll tell you what, you've got to say as well, Labourism failed, New Labour, right-wing Labour, bloody Jack Straw and these people refusing, and Blair refusing to deliver justice. We got to be honest about that. I don't want to see that last for any length of time. That Labourism that tries to rub shoulders with the Tories and be close and respectful and, we're all part of the official society. The official society spits on people like us. We are the people of resistance. That's why we're doing the food banks, week in, week out. And it's a whole different tradition to what the suited and booted, fragrant, bloody, plastic politicians want to do,
Yeah. Michael, I just wanted to come to you. Yeah, sorry.
I was just going to follow on from that. And the horrific events that happened on that day in Hillsborough and the subsequent events led to the one of the most successful boycotts that has been seen in this country of the scum, of the rag itself, and what stemmed from that. And I think that has a huge, huge impact on the politics in this city, because it's not spoken about, it's not talked about, and anywhere it pops up, there's the campaign to get it done in corners, to get it gone in corner shops and supermarkets. We won't have the absolute lies and absolute appalling nonsense that paper spouted it in our city ever, and that's a huge thing, because when we've been out campaigning in general elections around the northwest, around the country, it's quite shocking, really, for Scousers and people who've lived in Liverpool for a long time. Then you go and you see corner shops with 10, 15-foot advertising on the front for the rag, and working class people from building sites in cafes reading it at the table and in cafes and on the breaks. And I think that plays a big role in the socialist values and tradition of our city as well, and the reason why we've managed to stem any kind of move towards in the north, where you saw more rightward movements especially around Brexit and whatnot. I think that's why Liverpool stayed strong in the 2019 election, when other areas of the Red Wall were decimated, really.
Yeah, and I just wanted to ask a bit more about football as well, because it feels like football clubs are certainly more politically conscious. I mean, you've talked about Everton fans supporting the Hillsborough campaign and all those amazing campaigners that they sort of pulled together, and they should never have had to do that, but that real strength. Do you think that kind of has laid, in the worst circumstances in a lot of ways, but it's laid a kind of foundation for more, politically aware football fans?
Absolutely. I think what you opened up with about the links between socialism and football in the city go way back and stem from like the likes of Bill Shankly and whatnot. And then that kind of culture was strengthened in the aftermath, I think, around the aftermath of Hillsborough and whatnot, and the coming together of fans in the city and the unity that was showed during that period, and following on from that the fan activism has become a huge thing in the city. You mentioned fan support and food banks. Whenever I've been able to get lucky enough to get a ticket for a Liverpool game, I'll always go to Anfield Road with a bag of food at the purple van outside, and you'll have Dave and Ian are there every week in, week out to collect that food. And I think that kind of solidarity, which is what it's all about, is really stemming into communities through, because football is seen as and is a working class sport, and it brought that kind of connection together and linking in the politics with that solidarity, with that community activism, with the football, I think made it reach a wider audience and brought more and more people in to the way of thinking of the way of socialism, about helping each other, working together to help each other. And I think that's flourished, and it's been really aided by the fan activism and football in the city.
Yeah. You mentioned Ian Byrne there as well. I mean, he's done an amazing job in publicising that, hasn't he? And really pushing it. Again and again and again. Alan, sorry, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, got to mention the other one of the Holy Trinity, which is Robbie Daniels. There was three of them, just
apologies. Yeah.
And the other campaign was they tried to bring in pay-per-view, for one of the matches. Yeah. So people boycotted it and paid the cost of the pay-per-view. And they raised loads. I can't remember the exact figure, but, and they did it outside Liverpool as well. And that was fantastic, because they forced through pay-per-view for boxing. And that was bloody tragic. I hate having to pay for boxing, I didn't have to pay to see Muhammad Ali. So why do I have to pay for crap boxes?
Yeah. thanks for that. I think it's really important to have discussed that the football angle on this. There's also the other side of Liverpool, which is about sort of music and culture, Alice. And I know this is a massive sort of part of the kind of identity of Liverpool. And how much does it play into the politics, though? Do you think?
I mean, identity is the word, isn't it? Liverpool has a really strong identity, and I think, and being the kind of city it is, working class, kind of out on the edge of nowhere, really. It's only got to go back in itself. So Liverpool keeps reinventing itself. It's such a unique geographical position that the city's in, I think, and the influences that come in from abroad and have come in like for centuries. We've got really old settled communities, and that makes it a really multicultural city. And I know we've talked about the fact that there is racism and there has been terrible historic racism. There's also been fantastic historic multiculturalism and mixing of cultures, and it's been really vibrant. And I'm also speaking about not just, African American, but also the Chinese, the Irish, all really, really strong identities, bringing something really unique to Liverpool, and people have embraced it because it's a working class city, and we pull together and we build communities together. There's not really been a ghettoisation of any community, really. I mean, that kind of happened in the 80s with the Black community, but I think it's the multicultural aspect of it. And also, going back to slavery, we have unbelievable architecture that was built on the back of that money, and that's part of our identity. The city's beautiful, and people don't realise that when they come to Liverpool, they think they're coming to, I don't know, Brookside or Boys from the Black Stuff, but we have the most grade 2 and 1 listed buildings outside of London. There's a pub on every corner, there's bands playing, there used to be. And let's face it, austerity is killing the arts, and that cannot be forgotten. I live in Woolton, which had a really strong Irish community. There's a pub on every corner in Woolton. It's allegedly posh, but they're all pissed, to be honest. Too pissed to be posh. There were bands playing here every week. Obviously, I'm not talking about before lockdown, I'm talking about 10, 15 years ago. And that is not the case anymore, because the music industry is the live industry is dying, really, because venues aren't getting the funding. We still have a strong history, but we're also struggling to get the right, to get people to go to venues. So that's austerity is the death knell of the arts, sadly.
I mean, I been to a couple of Labour Party conferences in Liverpool now, and the last one, the Liverpool Left was just sort of taking off. And I thought what was really interesting about that initiative, and I think it was brilliant. I went to a fantastic gig with Cast, I think it was, or the guy from Cast, I can't remember. And the whole concept of that was to put culture and music at the center of it, which I think is brilliant. And I think maybe that could, that was such a Liverpool thing to do with a kind of left organizing project. Anybody else want to say anything about? Yeah. Sorry, Tracy. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, just quickly. Liverpool Left, excellent. There's also the Mersey Socialist Club, which does similar things as well, which most of us are engaged with. From communities, Blackfest has come up in the last few years, which is brilliant, and given a platform to really great creative people who otherwise wouldn't get there. And there's lots of stuff come out from that, from organisations such as Writing on the Wall, and many others, 20 Stories High. There's a lot. And at all the protests, we have local musicians generally will turn up and sing. Teo Luco did a brilliant Joe Hill at a protest last year, just after the general election. So that all has its place. And recently, during COVID, Ian Prowse has also played at the Liverpool Left thing. Has really lifted a lot of people's spirits by doing a Friday night show. He's really seen a lot of people through this. So, you know, hats off to the creatives who were very much suffering during this time.
Yeah,
exactly. Really suffering during this time, but, you know, still doing what they can.
Yeah. Michael, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to echo some of the sentiments that Tracy's just said. I think Liverpool Left and Mersey Socialist Club do a great job of bringing that mixture of culture and art into the politics, because the two are very intertwined and very linked. But what they do as well is they do a great job of getting people who are members or interested into becoming active. Ian and Sarah, with Sarah Henny and Ian Byrne, who Liverpool Left, helped me organise an event for young people around the climate catastrophe last summer. And it was 11 years in Cowton, Climate to Class issue, and we went out, we promoted that. We had bands along, we had Melbourne original series, we had a number of people on, we had shipbuilders, we had all sorts of things going on. And we had people who had been members, young people who told us they'd been members for a long time, but never felt comfortable coming to a meeting scenario. But now they're officers within our CLPs, they're activists, they're turning up on every picket line and every campaign. And I feel like that kind of mix of arts and culture provides a platform for people to actually go, do you know what? Politics isn't just about people sat in a room arguing, although that's a part that many of us enjoy as well. But that's not what it is in its entirety, and there's a place for them in our movement. We're not going to send anybody who doesn't want to do that away. There's a space for all people with the same politics and ideologies as us in our movement.
Yeah.
And Alan, you'd agree that the music culture plays such a big role in the socialist movement in Liverpool.
Yeah, I mean, you take a look. I mean, the Christians' ideal world. There's so much that's provided. I mean, we had this gig Politics in the Park, and it raised thousands for our CLP. I mean, we had all these speakers along, like Len McCluskey, another Liverpool link, and Shami Chakrabarti and Richard Bergen. But I mean, honest, at the end, Len McCluskey was dancing to All Together Now. I was bloody beautiful, do you know what I mean? It was superb. And there's the other things that have contributed, like some of the films. There's a lovely guy, Chris Bernard, and he directed Letter to Brezhnev. And honest to God, it was one of the wonderful films of the 1980s. And these things do crop up again and again and again. Willie Russell, Blood Brothers in Liverpool at the Everyman. It's just like it's like an emotional experience, for people who go along, because it's so intimate. See, Boys from the Black Stuff echoes down the years. I mean, Liverpool's a bit like the bee. It should not be able to fly aerodynamically. It should not be able to survive what it did. I remember in Boys from the Black Stuff, they had the wreck that was at the Albert Dock. And there was Peter Kerrigan being propped up as a dying man, by Chrissy. And he said, "I can't believe that my class is dead." And then you go to the Albert Dock now, and it's thriving, and this city just keeps coming back. And there's a statue of Billy Fury. There's a statue to what I'm proud of, the Irish people that contributed so much. I'll tell you a little story about that. I was in an independent school, and this kid looked like Boris Johnson. His dad was obviously a Tory. And he said, "My dad says that we pay for your benefits," because they knew I lived in Liverpool. And I said, "Tell your dad, we built the canals, we built the factories, we done the building sites. And if he wants to telephone me, there's my phone number, and we can discuss who built the bricks of this country of ours. And it wasn't the ruling class."
Excellent. We're beyond our hour, but and it's gone really, really quickly. And I've been saying this a lot, but definitely, you know, we've just scratched the surface here, and I think it's really nice to hear this, you know, both the history and the kind of enthusiasm for the kind of current activism. I just wanted, before we finish though, just to give people a chance to do a bit of a plug for things that, you know, people should read or watch, or you know, bits of drama. You mentioned Blood Brothers and so on, but things that, you know, kind of explain the history. I don't know who wants to go first and just lob things in. Yeah, Alice.
I have a book about the riots called Liverpool 81. It's stories from people who were there and experienced it. So it's not a historian's perspective. It's from the people, and it's recommended reading.
Yeah, and Tracy.
Very quickly, I haven't got the full title, but it's The History of Black Liverpool by Dave Clay. It's available on Amazon. That's out now. There's lots of stuff on YouTube by Lawrence Westcalf, a local historian. Interesting other stuff. There's stuff on there about the uprising in 81. And also there's a film about the Kirby rent strike, and I can't remember who the name of the filmmaker was. That's a really excellent film as well. But there's so much. I think really we just send you a load of links to put out sometimes.
Yeah, well,
we could fill up your schedule forevermore.
Here's two for you. And the Sun Shines Now, absolutely superb, by a guy called Adrian Tempany. And then the man himself, Never a Yes Man, Eric Heffer. Absolute class. There he is.
Yeah. That is actually one of my favourite political books. I mean, it's more than a biography, isn't it? It's really an explanation of his socialism. And he's just a thoroughly decent man, isn't he? And quite sometimes forgotten about. I mean, obviously he's always mentioned. He had a lot of quips and things. The people, it's always good to see a few memes out there on Twitter from Eric Heffer, but quite often forget him, among Skinner and Ben and so on. And that book is something. I mean, it's a brilliant book. Michael, anything to add lastly?
I was just going to echo the Never a Yes Man was what I was going to say. And you've also got obviously the one that was mentioned earlier, The Making of a Liverpool Militant, and you've got A City That Dared to Fight, and then obviously the shows that have been mentioned, including Blood Brothers, which is one of my favourite plays. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Can I plug two more?
Yeah.
One of them is go back on YouTube to some of the Brooksides in the early days when Ricky Tomlinson was in. Yeah. There's one that shows him talking about the strike.
Oh, I think I remember it.
And the other one that is to understand Liverpool 8 and, racism in Liverpool and the struggle against it and breaking through in football, Howard Gale, his autobiography is just, it's a
Howard's autobiography. Yes. I forgot that one.
Yeah, absolutely superb.
I didn't know he'd written a biography.
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you so much. We've gone a bit over, but that's to be expected, and it's been a brilliant discussion. I really enjoyed it, and if it's all right with you, I'll drop in on you again, and we'll get an update at some point and maybe explore something. I mean, I would love to do just a program, about some of the figures that you've mentioned, talking about Heffer in more detail and about his life and his politics, maybe. So we'll have a look at that in a future program, maybe. But thank you so much, Michael, Alan, Alice, and Tracy, and lend their solidarity.
Always.